Everyone knew this street belonged to death after dark, especially when Samuel Valentini walked it. Then he stopped. A widow and 2 sleeping children were on a bench where no one survived the night. And the most dangerous man in the city decided not to walk away. What he did next put blood on the snow, and someone's life was about to end. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. Snow fell quietly over the narrow street, coating cobblestones and iron gates in white. The city was unusually silent, the kind of silence that came only when people knew better than to linger outside after dark. Samuel Valentini walked alone. He didn't need bodyguards tonight. He didn't need to announce himself. His presence did that on its own. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved through the winter night like a shadow given form. His long dark coat dusted with fresh snow, his leather gloves absorbing the cold without complaint. Tattoos climbed his neck marks that told stories most men didn't live long enough to understand. People who spotted him crossing the street lowered their heads. Shop doors closed faster. Curtains fell back into place. Even the men who lived by violence chose caution over courage when Samuel was nearby. No one dared approach him. No one dared attack him. Samuel liked it that way. He'd built his reputation carefully over the years, brick by bloody brick, until his name alone carried the weight of consequence. In this city tucked between old residential districts and industrial shadows, there were laws written in courtrooms, and then there were laws written in silence and understood in fear. Samuel Valentini was the latter. He turned down a side street lined with tall brick walls and black iron gates, his breath visible in the freezing air. The gas lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted with each step he took. The snow absorbed sound, muffling the world into a kind of eerie stillness. This was his city. Every corner, every alley, every soul that breathed within its borders existed because he allowed it. But tonight, something felt different. Samuel slowed his pace, sharp eyes scanning the street ahead. Years of survival had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were whispering that something was out of place. He walked past shuttered storefronts and residential buildings with darkened windows, his gaze methodical, calculating. Then he saw it, a bench, and on it people. Samuel stopped completely. In his world, people who slept on the streets at night didn't wake up the same, or at all. The cold alone could kill, but the cold was rarely the worst thing waiting in the darkness. He moved closer, his footsteps deliberate but quiet. A woman sat slumped forward on the bench, her thin coat doing nothing against the bitter wind. Her arms were wrapped tightly around 2 small children who slept against her. One child's head rested on her chest, the other curled at her side, tiny hands tucked into worn sleeves. They were completely defenseless, and they were exactly where they shouldn't be. Samuel's jaw tightened. He glanced down the empty street, then back at the woman and children. Snow had begun to gather on their shoulders and hair, turning them into fragile statues in a frozen landscape. Whoever this woman was, she'd made a catastrophic mistake. This part of the city wasn't safe. Not for anyone. Especially not for a woman and 2 children sleeping out in the open like forgotten baggage. Samuel stepped closer and reached out, tapping the woman's shoulder with 2 gloved fingers. "Hey," he said, his voice low but firm. "Wake up." The woman startled violently, her eyes flying open in panic. She pulled the children closer instinctively, her body shifting to shield them, as she looked up and froze completely when she saw him. Tall, imposing, dark coat dusted with snow, tattoos climbing his neck, a face carved from stone and winter, with eyes that held no warmth, no mercy, no room for weakness. Fear flooded her expression. Her breath came in short, visible gasps. Her arms tightened protectively around the 2 girls, who stirred slightly but didn't wake. Samuel studied her for a moment, exhausted, terrified, desperate. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone flat, practical. He glanced at the empty street again. "This place isn't safe. Not for you. Not for kids." The woman swallowed hard, her voice trembling when she finally spoke. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't make us leave." Samuel frowned. That wasn't the response he'd expected. "I'm not robbing you," he said bluntly. "I'm warning you, someone else might." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Her lips trembled, and she looked down at the sleeping children in her arms as if they were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, her voice breaking. Samuel didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, snow falling between them, the silence stretching. He could walk away. Should walk away. This wasn't his problem. He had enough weight on his shoulders without adding a stranger's tragedy to the pile, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she held those children like they were her entire world. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, the kind of desperation that came from having every door slammed in your face. Or maybe it was something deeper, something Samuel didn't want to examine too closely. He looked down at the two girls. One wore a bright yellow scarf wrapped around her neck. The other had a knit hat pulled low over her ears. Their faces were pale but peaceful. Unaware of how close they were to disaster, they were just kids, and they were sleeping on a street where kids didn't survive long. Samuel's expression hardened. "You're not staying here," he said finally. The woman's heart visibly dropped. "Please, I didn't say I'd throw you out," Samuel cut in, his voice sharp but controlled. "I said you're not staying here." The woman stared at him, stunned into silence. Samuel removed his coat, a long, heavy thing that had kept him warm through countless winters, and carefully wrapped it around the two children, adjusting it so the snow wouldn't touch their small faces. "There's a hotel 2 streets away," he said quietly. "You'll stay there tonight. Warm beds, food." The woman's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Why?" she finally managed. "Why are you helping us?" Samuel didn't answer. He simply motioned for her to follow. And when Samuel Valentini gave an order, people obeyed. Cecilia Wood didn't move at first. She sat frozen on that bench, staring up at the man who had just wrapped his expensive coat around her sleeping daughters like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her mind couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile the reputation with the action. Samuel Valentini stood waiting, patient but firm, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. He didn't repeat himself. Didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. "Move. Now." Cecilia shifted carefully, trying not to wake Nicole and Annie as she gathered them closer. Her arms trembled not just from cold, but from exhaustion that went bone deep. She hadn't slept properly in weeks, hadn't eaten a full meal in longer. Samuel watched her struggle for only a moment before stepping forward. Without asking permission, he lifted Annie from Cecilia's arms, the smaller of the two girls, no more than 4 years old, her knit hat slightly crooked on her head. "I can carry her," Cecilia protested weakly, though her arms were already shaking from Nicole's weight. Samuel ignored her. He adjusted Annie against his chest with surprising gentleness, making sure his coat stayed wrapped around her small frame. The child didn't wake, just nestled instinctively against the warmth. "Can you carry the other one?" Samuel asked. Cecilia nodded quickly, pulling Nicole, 6 years old and wearing that bright yellow scarf tighter against her shoulder. The girl mumbled something in her sleep but didn't stir. "Then walk," Samuel said simply, and turned toward the street. Cecilia followed because she had no other choice, and because somehow, despite every instinct screaming that this man was dangerous, she believed he wouldn't hurt them. Not tonight, anyway. The walk to the hotel felt surreal. Samuel moved through the snowy streets, like he owned them because, in many ways, he did. Cecilia struggled to keep pace, her worn shoes slipping on icy cobblestones, her breath coming in ragged clouds. She studied him from behind. The way he carried Annie so carefully, like the child was made of glass. The way people vanished from windows when they passed. The way the entire city seemed to hold its breath in his presence. Who was he, really? She'd heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Samuel Valentini wasn't just feared, he was legendary. A man who settled disputes with finality. A man who didn't forgive betrayal. A man whose word was law in the shadows where police didn't dare tread. But legends didn't wrap their coats around freezing children. Legends didn't notice women sleeping on benches. "Almost there," Samuel said without turning around. Cecilia blinked back tears. She didn't know if they were from relief or fear, or the simple fact that anyone had stopped to help. The hotel appeared like salvation through the falling snow. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was clean, well lit, and warm. Golden light spilled from the windows onto the white street. Cecilia could see people inside, a clerk behind a desk, a couple sitting in the lobby, normal people living normal lives, lives that felt impossibly distant from hers. Samuel pushed through the door first, and the effect was immediate. The clerk looked up, saw who had entered, and went completely pale. The couple in the lobby stopped mid-conversation. A woman carrying luggage toward the stairs froze on the steps. No one spoke. Samuel walked directly to the front desk, still holding Annie. The clerk, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, stood so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Mr. Valentini," the clerk stammered. We weren't expecting." "I need a room," Samuel said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight that made the entire lobby feel smaller. 2 beds, warm, clean, food sent up within the hour. Of course, immediately." The clerk's hands shook as he pulled out the registry. "How many nights?" "However many she needs," Samuel interrupted, nodding toward Cecilia, who stood just inside the doorway, clutching Nicole, looking completely out of place. The clerk's eyes widened slightly, but he asked no questions. "Right away, sir. Room 304, 3rd floor. Our best available." Samuel took the key without another word and headed for the stairs. Cecilia followed, feeling the weight of every stair in that lobby. She knew what they were thinking, knew what it looked like her, disheveled and desperate, following a man like Samuel Valentini into a hotel room. She didn't care. Her daughters would be warm tonight. That was all that mattered. Room 304 was simple but clean. 2 beds with thick blankets, a small bathroom, a radiator that hissed quietly, pumping blessed heat into the space, heavy curtains that blocked out the night. Samuel set Annie gently on the nearest bed, arranging his coat around her like a blanket. The child sighed in her sleep, already warmer. Cecilia laid Nicole beside her sister, then stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do with her hands. Samuel moved to the radiator and adjusted it higher. Then he checked the window lock, the bathroom, the door. "Food will come soon," he said, not looking at her. "Let them sleep. Let yourself sleep." Cecilia opened her mouth, then closed it. 1,000 questions fought for space on her tongue, but only one made it out. "Why are you doing this?" Samuel finally looked at her directly. His eyes were dark, unreadable, shadowed by things Cecilia couldn't begin to imagine. "Because they're children," he said simply. "And children don't survive on that bench. But you don't know us. You don't owe us anything." "No," Samuel agreed. "I don't." He moved toward the door, and panic flared in Cecilia's chest. "Wait," she started. Samuel paused, one hand on the doorknob. Will you come back?" The question sounded pathetic even to her own ears, but she needed to know, needed to understand if this was real, or just a temporary reprieve before the world crushed them again. Samuel studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Tomorrow morning, we'll talk." "About what?" His expression hardened, became something colder, more dangerous. "About the person who put you on that bench," Samuel said quietly. "And what happens to them next?" Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Cecilia stood alone in the warm room, listening to her daughters breathe peacefully for the first time in weeks. And despite everything, despite the fear, the uncertainty, the impossibility of it all, she believed him. Samuel Valentini would come back, and someone was going to pay. Morning came too quickly. Cecilia woke to sunlight streaming through the heavy curtains, and the unfamiliar sensation of warmth. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Nicole and Annie sleeping peacefully in the bed beside hers, still wrapped in Samuel Valentini's coat, and everything came rushing back. The bench, the snow, the man who shouldn't have helped but did. She sat up slowly, her body aching from weeks of sleeping in impossible positions. A tray sat on the small table near the window food, just as Samuel had promised. Bread, butter, jam, hot tea in a ceramic pot. Simple things that felt like luxuries. Cecilia's hands shook as she poured herself tea. The cup was warm against her palms, and she held it like a lifeline. A knock at the door made her jump. She set the cup down and moved quietly to the door, pressing her ear against it first. "It's me," came Samuel's voice from the other side. Low, unmistakable. Cecilia opened the door. Samuel stood in the hallway wearing a different coat, this one charcoal gray, equally expensive. His hair was damp, like he'd showered recently, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man who controlled everything around him with ruthless efficiency. "They still sleeping?" he asked, nodding toward the beds. "Yes," Cecilia whispered. "Good. Come into the hallway. We need to talk." It wasn't a request. Cecilia glanced back at her daughters, then stepped into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind her but leaving it cracked so she could hear if they woke. Samuel leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, studying her with those dark, calculating eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Cecilia. Cecilia Wood." "And them?" "Nicole and Annie. 6 and 4. Samuel nodded slowly, filing the information away. Tell me what happened. Cecilia's throat tightened. She'd known this was coming, known he'd want answers, but speaking the words out loud felt like reopening a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. My husband died, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 months ago. Car accident. He was a good man. He worked hard. We had a small house, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Samuel listened without interrupting. After he died, I couldn't afford to keep it, Cecilia continued. The mortgage, the bills, everything fell apart so fast. My husband's brother Thomas, he offered to help. Said we could stay with him until I got back on my feet. Her hands twisted together nervously. I thought he was being kind. Family, you know? But I was wrong. What did he do? Samuel's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it now. Cecilia's eyes filled with tears. He hated us. From the first day, he looked at my daughters like they were burdens, vermin. He barely let us eat. Made us stay in a tiny room in the basement. Told me I was worthless, that my husband had been a fool for marrying me. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. I endured it because I had nowhere else to go. I kept thinking maybe he'd soften. Maybe he'd remember that Nicole and Annie were his nieces. But he only got worse. Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 weeks ago I was in the kitchen late at night, Cecilia said, her voice trembling now. Thomas was in the next room with some of his friends. They were drinking, laughing, and I heard them talking. She closed her eyes, the memory cutting like broken glass. They were planning a robbery. Thomas was explaining it to them. He said there would be complications. That's what he called us, complications. He said if something unfortunate happened to us during the robbery, if we got hurt, if we died, then everything my husband left behind would legally go to him. The hallway felt colder suddenly. He was planning to kill you, Samuel stated flatly. Yes, Cecilia's voice broke completely. He was going to stage a break-in, make it look random, and we'd just be gone. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something dangerous. What did you do? I packed what little we had that same night, Cecilia said. I waited until Thomas passed out drunk, and then I took my daughters and ran. No money, no plan. I just ran. She looked down at her worn shoes, shame flooding through her. I walked for hours. I didn't know where to go. I was too afraid to go to the police. Thomas has connections there, friends on the force who owe him favors. I couldn't risk it. So I just kept walking until I couldn't anymore. And you ended up on that bench, Samuel finished. Cecilia nodded. I sat down just to rest. Just for a minute. I was crying, trying to figure out what to do next, and then, she gestured helplessly. I don't even remember falling asleep. When I woke up, you were there. Silence stretched between them. Samuel pushed off the wall and stood at his full height. He looked down the hallway, then back at Cecilia. This brother, he said quietly. Thomas, where does he live? Fear spiked through Cecilia. Why? Because someone needs to explain to him what happens when you threaten children, Samuel said, his voice devoid of emotion. And that someone is going to be me. No, please, I don't want trouble. You already have trouble, Samuel interrupted, his tone sharp. I'm just ending it. He has friends. Dangerous people. If you confront him, Samuel's laugh was cold, humorless. Cecilia, look at me. She did. Do I look like I'm worried about Thomas and his friends? He didn't. He looked like a man who'd faced down worse and walked away without a scratch. I need his address, Samuel said. And I need you to stay here with your daughters. Lock the door. Don't leave. Don't answer for anyone except me. What are you going to do? Samuel's eyes went flat, empty of everything except purpose. I'm going to make sure he never hurts another person again, he said simply. Especially not you. Especially not them. He nodded toward the room where Nicole and Annie still slept peacefully, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Cecilia stared at him, torn between terror and hope. Then, slowly, she told him the address. Samuel left without another word. Cecilia stood in the hallway long after his footsteps faded, her heart pounding against her ribs. She'd just sent a dangerous man to confront another dangerous man, and she had no idea what the consequences would be. But when she returned to the room and saw her daughters beginning to stir, saw Annie's small hand reach out for her mother even in sleep, Cecilia knew she'd made the right choice. Some bridges had to be burned. Some monsters had to be faced, and if Samuel Valentini was willing to be the fire, then she would let him burn. Nicole woke first, blinking slowly in the unfamiliar room. Her eyes, her father's eyes, dark and thoughtful, took in the clean walls, the warm radiator, the breakfast tray. "Mama?" Her voice was small, confused. "I'm here, baby." Cecilia sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair from Nicole's face. "We're safe now." "Where are we?" "A hotel. A kind man helped us." Annie stirred then, yawning widely and sitting up. She looked around with the resilience only small children possessed, already accepting this new reality without question. "I'm hungry," she announced. Cecilia laughed, actually laughed for the first time in weeks. "There's food. Come on." She helped both girls to the table and watched them eat with an intensity that broke her heart. They were so thin, so pale. When had she last seen them eat without fear? Without Thomas's hateful eyes watching their every bite? Nicole ate slowly, methodically, like she was afraid the food might disappear. Annie devoured her bread and jam, getting sticky fingerprints on everything. "Where's the man's coat?" Nicole asked suddenly, looking around. Cecilia realized Samuel's coat was still draped over the bed. She picked it up, feeling the weight and quality of it. Expensive, well-made, the kind of thing men in Thomas's world could never afford. "We'll give it back to him," Cecilia said. "Is he coming back?" Nicole's question was careful, measured. "Yes. Is he going to hurt us?" The question shattered something in Cecilia's chest. That her 6-year-old daughter had to ask such things. That fear had become their constant companion. "No, sweetheart, no. He's helping us." "Why?" Cecilia didn't have an answer for that. She didn't understand it herself. Hours passed slowly. Cecilia tried to keep the girls occupied, but there were no toys, no books, nothing but the 4 walls, and each other. She told them stories, sang songs she remembered from her own childhood, made up games with the few items in the room. But her mind kept returning to Samuel. What was he doing right now? Had he found Thomas? Was there violence? Blood? The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it brought a dark satisfaction she didn't want to examine too closely. Afternoon light was fading when another knock came at the door. Cecilia's breath caught. She moved to the door cautiously, pressing her ear against it first. "It's me, Samuel." She opened the door quickly. He stood there looking exactly as he had that morning, composed, controlled, not a hair out of place. But Cecilia noticed his knuckles. They were slightly reddened, like he'd hit something. Or someone. "Can I come in?" he asked. Cecilia stepped aside. Samuel entered, and his presence seemed to fill the small room. Nicole and Annie watched him from the bed with wide, curious eyes. He looked at them, then at Cecilia. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Alone." Cecilia glanced at her daughters. "Girls, stay here. I'll be right outside." "Is everything okay, Mama?" Nicole's voice trembled. "Yes, baby. Everything's fine." In the hallway, Cecilia closed the door and turned to face Samuel. Her hands were shaking. "What happened?" she whispered. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "Plain manila. Nothing remarkable about it. Your brother-in-law won't be a problem anymore," he said simply. "Is he?" Cecilia couldn't finish the question. "Alive?" "Yes." Samuel's tone was flat, barely worth the effort to kill, honestly. Relief and disappointment warred in Cecilia's chest. "Then what?" "I had a conversation with him," Samuel interrupted. "A very clear, very detailed conversation about what happens to men who threaten women and children for inheritance money." He handed her the folder. "What is this? Open it." Cecilia's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were documents, legal documents, deeds, bank statements, all with her name on them. "I don't understand." "Everything your husband left behind is now legally back in your name," Samuel explained. "The house, the accounts, the life insurance policy Thomas convinced you didn't exist. All of it." Cecilia's legs nearly gave out. She leaned against the wall, staring at the papers in disbelief. "How? How did you get him to—" "I explained the situation clearly," Samuel said. "And I explained what would happen if he didn't sign. Men like Thomas are cowards. They fold when someone stronger pushes back." Tears streamed down Cecilia's face. I can't believe." "You can go home," Samuel said quietly. "Your real home. Not his. Yours." "What about Thomas? Will he come after us?" Samuel's expression went cold. "No, he won't. I made sure he understands that if he comes within 100 yards of you or your daughters, if he even speaks your name, he won't live to regret it." The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Cecilia looked down at the folder, at the proof that her life had just been handed back to her. Then she looked up at Samuel, this dangerous, violent man who had shown her more kindness than her own family. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do this?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Because someone should have done it sooner," he said. "Because those girls in there deserve better than sleeping on frozen benches. Because their mother deserves better than running scared from the people who were supposed to protect her." He straightened, preparing to leave. "You saved us," Cecilia said, her voice breaking. "You saved our lives." Samuel shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I just made sure you could save your own." He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Cecilia stood there, clutching the folder to her chest, watching him disappear around the corner. Behind her, through the door, she could hear Nicole and Annie's voices, alive, safe, free, and for the first time in months, Cecilia believed they might actually have a future. Cecilia didn't sleep that night. She sat in the chair by the window, watching her daughters breathe peacefully in their beds, the folder of documents resting in her lap like a fragile promise. Every few minutes, she'd open it again, running her fingers over the pages as if to confirm they were real. The house, the accounts, everything. It was too much, too impossible. And yet, there it was signed, notarized, legal. But something gnawed at her, a question that had been building since the moment Samuel handed her that folder. What had he done to make Thomas sign? She'd seen Samuel's knuckles, seen the cold certainty in his eyes when he promised Thomas wouldn't be a problem. Men like Samuel didn't negotiate with words alone. As dawn broke over the city, painting the snow-covered streets in shades of gold and gray, Cecilia made a decision. She needed to know. Samuel returned at 9 o'clock, punctual as a clockwork mechanism. This time, Cecilia was ready. She'd fed the girls, gotten them dressed in the only clothes they had, and prepared herself for the conversation she knew they needed to have. When his knock came, she opened the door immediately. "We need to talk," she said before he could speak. Samuel raised an eyebrow slightly. "About everything. What you did. What happens next?" She glanced back at Nicole and Annie, who were drawing pictures on hotel stationery with a pen the front desk had sent up. "Please." Samuel studied her for a moment, then nodded. Hallway. They stood in the same spot as yesterday, but everything felt different now. The power dynamic had shifted somehow. Cecilia was no longer the desperate woman on the bench. She was a mother protecting her children, and she needed answers. "What did you do to Thomas?" she asked directly. Samuel's expression didn't change. "I told you. We had a conversation. Don't patronize me." Cecilia's voice was firm despite the tremor underneath. "I saw your hands. I know men like you don't just have conversations. What did you do?" A flicker of something respect maybe passed through Samuel's eyes. "You really want to know?" "Yes." Samuel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I went to his house. Walked in through the front door. He doesn't lock it during the day. Arrogant bastard. He was in his living room with 2 of his friends. The same friends who were supposed to help him stage the robbery." Cecilia's hands clenched. "They recognized me immediately," Samuel continued, his tone conversational. "Started reaching for weapons they didn't have close enough. I told them to sit down. They sat. And then? Then I explained to Thomas exactly what I knew. About his plan. About you and the girls. About the inheritance." Samuel's voice went colder. "I explained that attempting to murder a widow and her children for money was the kind of thing that gets men buried in unmarked graves." Cecilia's breath caught. "I gave him a choice," Samuel said. "Sign everything back over to you, legally and permanently, or I'd make sure he disappeared so thoroughly that not even his friends would remember his name. Did you hurt him?" Samuel's silence was answer enough. "He tried to argue," he finally said. "Tried to claim you were lying. Tried to play the victim. So I reminded him what happens to liars in my city." "How?" Samuel's eyes met hers directly. "I broke 2 of his fingers, slowly, and I explained that if he didn't sign, I'd work my way up both hands, then move to more important body parts." Cecilia should have been horrified, should have felt disgust, fear, moral outrage. Instead, she felt relief. "He signed after the 2nd finger," Samuel added. "Cried like a child while doing it. His friends watched and said nothing. They know better than to interfere when I'm handling business. What about them? The friends? Warned them. Told them if any harm comes to you or your daughters from anyone, ever I'd assume they were involved and act accordingly. Samuel's expression was granite. They won't be a problem. Cecilia processed this, her mind working through implications and consequences. So you tortured him, she said quietly. I motivated him, Samuel corrected. There's a difference. And if he reports you, goes to the police? Samuel's laugh was sharp and humorless. With what evidence? 2 broken fingers he got from falling downstairs? Besides, men like Thomas don't go to police. They know what happens to snitches in this city. He straightened, his full height suddenly imposing. But that's not why you wanted to talk, is it? He asked. You wanted to know if I'm dangerous, if you should be afraid of me. Cecilia met his gaze steadily. Are you? Dangerous? Yes. No hesitation, no qualification. Should I be afraid of you? No. Samuel's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Not you, not them. Never them. Why not? Because you're not my enemy, he said simply. And I don't hurt people who aren't my enemies, but you do hurt people, when they deserve it. No shame, no apology, just fact. Cecilia took a shaky breath. I should be horrified by what you did, but you're not. No, she admitted, I'm not. Does that make me a bad person? Samuel's expression shifted, something almost like understanding crossing his features. It makes you a mother, he said. One who's watched bad men take everything from her. There's no shame in being glad when they finally face consequences. Silence stretched between them. What happens now? Cecilia asked. Now you take your daughters home, your real home. You rebuild your life. You move on. And Thomas? Thomas learns to live with 2 broken fingers and the knowledge that he's being watched, Samuel said coldly. If he's smart, he'll leave the city. If he's not, he'll try something stupid, and I'll finish what I started. Cecilia looked down at her hands, worn, calloused from work, from survival. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Then don't, Samuel said. Just take care of those girls. Give them the life their father wanted them to have. He pushed off the wall, preparing to leave. Wait, Cecilia said suddenly. Will I see you again? Samuel paused, something unreadable crossing his face. This city isn't that big, he said quietly. Our paths might cross. And if I need help? If something happens? Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a card. Plain white, a single phone number printed in black ink. Call that number. Leave a message. I'll find you. Cecilia took the card with trembling fingers. Samuel turned to leave, then stopped. Cecilia. Yes, you're stronger than you think. Don't forget that. Then he was gone. The night Samuel confronted Thomas Wood, the temperature had dropped below freezing. It was the kind of cold that made bones ache and breath crystallize in the air, the kind of cold that kept honest people indoors and gave predators false confidence in the darkness. Samuel drove through the city in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind calculating every move he was about to make. He'd gotten Thomas's address from Cecilia, along with a description of the house and the men who frequented it. Thomas Wood lived in a modest 2-story home on the east side, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and police response times were measured in hours, not minutes. Perfect for a man planning crimes, equally perfect for Samuel's brand of justice. He parked 3 houses down and walked the rest of the way. The house was dark except for light spilling from the front windows. Samuel could see shadows moving inside multiple people. Thomas wasn't alone. Good. Witnesses made the lesson stick. Samuel didn't knock. He simply opened the unlocked front door and walked in like he owned the place. The living room fell silent instantly. 3 men sat around a coffee table littered with beer bottles and playing cards. Money was scattered across the surface. Small bills, the kind men bet when they're pretending to be more dangerous than they are. Thomas Wood sat in the center, mid-laugh, a bottle halfway to his lips. He was soft around the middle, with thinning hair and the kind of face that smiled too easily. The kind of man who hurt people weaker than himself and called it strength. His smile died when he saw Samuel. Who the hell? Thomas started to stand. Sit down, Samuel said quietly. The command in his voice was absolute. Thomas sat. The other 2 men, one with a shaved head and prison tattoos, the other younger with nervous eyes, looked between Samuel and Thomas, confused but sensing danger. I said sit, Samuel repeated, looking at them now. They sat. Samuel closed the door behind him, and moved further into the room, taking his time, letting them feel the weight of his presence. He noted the positions of every person, every potential weapon, every exit. "Do you know who I am?" Samuel asked Thomas directly. Thomas swallowed hard. "No, liar." Samuel's voice was ice. "Look at me again. Really look." Thomas did. And recognition dawned slowly, followed immediately by fear. "Oh God," he whispered. You're Samuel Valentini," Samuel finished. "And you, Thomas Wood, have a problem. I don't know what you're talking about. Your sister-in-law, Cecilia, and her 2 daughters, Nicole and Annie." Samuel let each name land like a stone. Ring any bells? The color drained from Thomas's face. "I found them last night," Samuel continued, moving closer. "Sleeping on a bench in the snow." "Do you know why they were there, Thomas?" Thomas's mouth opened and closed uselessly. "Because you," Samuel said, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet, "planned to have them killed, to stage a robbery, to murder a widow and 2 children so you could steal their inheritance. That's not, I would never." Samuel moved faster than Thomas could track. One moment he was standing across the room. The next, his hand was wrapped around Thomas's throat, lifting him slightly from the chair. The other 2 men jerked but didn't move. They knew better. "Don't lie to me," Samuel said, his face inches from Thomas's. "I already know everything. I just want to hear you admit it." Thomas clawed at Samuel's hand, gasping. Samuel released him, letting him collapse back into the chair. "She's lying," Thomas wheezed, rubbing his throat. "That bitch is lying. She's trying to take what's rightfully mine." The backhand came so fast Thomas didn't see it. His head snapped to the side, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Wrong answer," Samuel said. "Jesus Christ," one of the friends started. Samuel's gaze cut to him. "You. What's your name?" Derek. "Derek. Were you part of the plan?" Derek's eyes went wide. "What plan? I don't—" "The robbery. The one where Cecilia and her daughters were supposed to die." "I don't know anything about that." Derek's voice cracked. Thomas said he said it was just about getting some money from a storage unit. "He lied to you," Samuel said flatly. "He was planning a home invasion, and you were going to help him murder a woman and 2 little girls." No, I swear I didn't know." Samuel believed him. The fear was too genuine. He turned to the other man. "And you?" "I'm just here for cards, man. I don't know anything about anything." Samuel studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Both of you, leave, now." They didn't need to be told twice. Derek and the other man scrambled for the door and were gone in seconds. Samuel turned back to Thomas, who was pressed against the back of his chair, blood trickling from his lip. "Now it's just us," Samuel said softly. "And we're going to have a very clear conversation about consequences." "Please," Thomas started. "Where are the documents?" Samuel interrupted. "The ones proving Cecilia's ownership of the house, the accounts, everything her husband left behind. I don't have—" Samuel grabbed Thomas's right hand and bent his index finger backward, not breaking it yet, just applying pressure. Thomas screamed. "I'll ask one more time," Samuel said. "Where are the documents?" "Upstairs, bedroom, in the safe." Samuel released the finger. "Combination," Thomas gave it, sobbing. "Good. Now you're going to sign everything back over to Cecilia, legally, permanently, and you're going to do it without argument. That's my money. My brother was an idiot who married—" Samuel broke the finger. The crack was audible. Thomas's scream echoed through the house. "Your brother," Samuel said calmly, holding Thomas's hand steady as he writhed, "was a better man than you'll ever be, and those girls are worth more than your entire bloodline." He released Thomas's hand and pulled out his phone, already having arranged for a notary one who knew better than to ask questions to be on standby. "Here's what's going to happen," Samuel continued. "You're going to sign. You're going to transfer everything. And then you're going to disappear from their lives forever. And if I don't?" Thomas gasped through tears of pain. Samuel smiled a cold, terrible thing. "Then I'll break every finger. Then your wrists. Then I'll move to your knees. And when I'm done, you'll sign anyway, but you'll spend the rest of your life remembering what happens to men who threaten children." He leaned closer. "Choose wisely, Thomas. This is the only mercy you're getting." Thomas chose survival. Within 2 hours, every document was signed. Every asset transferred, every claim relinquished. And when Samuel finally left that house, Thomas Wood sat broken and sobbing in his chair, understanding for the first time in his life what real power looked like. 3 days after Samuel had walked into Thomas's house, Cecilia stood in front of the home she thought she'd lost forever. It was a small house, modest by any standard, with pale blue siding and white shutters that needed repainting. A tiny front porch with 2 steps. A mailbox that tilted slightly to the left. A yard that had grown wild in her absence. But it was hers. Nicole and Annie stood on either side of her, each holding one of her hands. They stared at the house with wide eyes, barely remembering it. So much had changed. So much had been taken from them. And now, impossibly, it was being given back. "Is this really our house, Mama?" Nicole asked quietly. "Yes, baby," Cecilia whispered, tears already streaming down her face. "It's really ours." She pulled the key from her pocket, the key Samuel had included in the folder along with all the documents. Her hands shook as she climbed the porch steps and fitted it into the lock. The door opened. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it 4 months ago. Dust covered the furniture. The air was stale. Family photos still hung on the walls, her husband's smile frozen in time, forever young, forever alive in those captured moments. Annie ran inside immediately, her small footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. "My room is still here. Mama, my room is still here." Nicole moved more slowly, touching things carefully, as if afraid they might disappear. Cecilia stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by memory and grief and impossible hope. Her husband had died in this house. His last morning, his last cup of coffee, his last kiss goodbye before the accident that took him from them. But her daughters had been born here too. First steps taken on these floors, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, laughter and love and all the small moments that built a life. This was home, and Samuel Valentini had given it back to her. The next morning, Cecilia went to the bank. She brought all the documents Samuel had provided, her hands trembling as she presented them to the bank manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who'd known her husband. Patricia's eyes widened as she reviewed the papers. "Cecilia, are these legitimate?" "Yes. Everything's been notarized and legally processed." Patricia looked up, confused. "But Thomas said you'd abandoned the property. He came in last month trying to claim the accounts." "Thomas lied," Cecilia said firmly. "This is my house. These are my accounts. My husband left them to me and our daughters." Patricia studied the documents again, then nodded slowly. "Everything appears to be in order. I'll need to process this, but—" She smiled. "Welcome home, Cecilia." By the end of the day, every account was back in her name. The life insurance policy her husband had taken out, the one Thomas had convinced her didn't exist, was confirmed and would begin paying out monthly benefits. It wasn't wealth, but it was enough. Enough to feed her daughters, enough to keep the lights on, enough to rebuild. That evening, Cecilia cooked dinner in her own kitchen for the first time in months. Just simple pasta with butter and vegetables from the corner market. But Nicole and Annie ate like it was a feast, sitting at their own table, in their own home, without fear. "Mama?" Nicole asked between bites. "Is Uncle Thomas going to come back?" The question stopped Cecilia cold. "No, sweetheart, he's not." "How do you know?" Cecilia thought of Samuel, of his cold certainty, of the promise in his eyes. "Because someone made sure he understood he's not welcome here anymore." "The man who helped us?" Annie asked. "The one with the coat?" "Yes." "Is he coming back?" Nicole's voice was small, careful. "I don't know," Cecilia admitted. "I hope he does," Annie said matter-of-factly. "I want to say thank you." Nicole nodded in agreement. Cecilia's throat tightened. Her daughters, who had learned to fear adults, to expect cruelty instead of kindness, wanted to thank the most dangerous man Cecilia had ever met, because to them, Samuel wasn't dangerous. He was the person who'd wrapped them in his coat, who'd carried Annie when Cecilia's arms gave out, who'd given them back their home and their future. 2 days later, Cecilia was in the front yard pulling weeds when a black car pulled up to the curb. Her heart jumped. Samuel emerged from the driver's side, dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, looking as composed and controlled as always. He closed the door and walked up the front path, his eyes scanning the house, the yard, her. "You're home," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Cecilia stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Thanks to you." Samuel glanced at the house. "Everything in order? No problems?" "Everything's perfect. The bank processed everything. The accounts are active." She struggled for words. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to." "Samuel." "Mr. Valentini." Annie's voice rang out from the front door. She came running down the steps, Nicole following more cautiously behind. Samuel's expression shifted something softer, replacing the usual hardness, as Annie stopped in front of him, looking up with absolute trust. "We wanted to say thank you," Annie announced, "for helping us, and for your coat." It was very warm. Nicole stepped forward and held out Samuel's coat, carefully folded. "We wanted to return this." Samuel took the coat, his eyes moving between the two girls. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. "You're welcome," he finally said, his voice quieter than Cecilia had ever heard it. "Are you going to visit us again?" Annie asked. "Annie," Cecilia started. "I might," Samuel said, surprising them all. He looked at Cecilia. "If your mother says it's all right." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Cecilia. She thought of everything Samuel had done. The violence, the broken fingers, the threats. She thought of Thomas, who'd smiled while planning to murder her children. She thought of the bench, the snow, the moment she'd thought they wouldn't survive the night. And she thought of Samuel's coat wrapped around her daughters. His promise to make things right, his refusal to accept thanks for doing what he believed was simply correct. "You're welcome here," Cecilia said softly. "Anytime." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, gratitude, maybe, or surprise that someone would willingly invite him into their home. "I'll remember that," he said. He nodded to the girls, then turned back to his car. "Samuel?" Cecilia called after him. He paused. "You saved us. You saved our lives. I need you to know that." Samuel looked back at her, at the house, at the 2 small girls watching him with open faces and unguarded trust. "No," he said quietly. "I just made sure you had the chance to save yourselves." Then he got in his car and drove away. Cecilia stood in her yard with her daughters beside her, watching until the car disappeared. For the first time in months, she believed tomorrow might actually come. Samuel's inner circle met in the back room of a restaurant that didn't officially exist. The building had no sign, no listed phone number, no permits filed with the city. It was simply a place where men like Samuel conducted business away from curious eyes and recording devices. Tonight, 5 men sat around a scarred wooden table, smoke from expensive cigars curling toward the ceiling. These were Samuel's trusted lieutenants, men who'd built their reputations on loyalty and violence in equal measure, and they were concerned. "You broke into Thomas Wood's house," said Constantine, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. "For a woman you don't know. Over a family dispute." Samuel poured himself whiskey, his movements unhurried. "I did." "That's not how we operate," pressed James, younger but no less dangerous. "We don't get involved in domestic issues. We don't play hero for civilians." "I didn't ask for your approval," Samuel said calmly. "Maybe you should have." Constantine shot back. "Because now people are talking. They're saying Samuel Valentini has gone soft, that he's protecting random women and children instead of protecting his business." Samuel's eyes went cold. "And who exactly is saying this?" The room went quiet. "People talk," Constantine said carefully. "You know how it is. Word spreads. Men start wondering if you've lost your edge. Let them wonder," Samuel said, taking a drink. "That's not how this works." James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against concrete. "Reputation is everything in our world. If people think you're weak, they'll test you. They'll push boundaries. They'll come for what's yours." Samuel set his glass down with deliberate care. "Sit down, James." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But James sat immediately. "Let me make something clear," Samuel said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "What I did for Cecilia Wood has nothing to do with weakness. I saw a woman and her children in danger. I eliminated the threat. That's not mercy, that's efficiency. But breaking Thomas's fingers? Forcing documents?" Constantine shook his head. "That's personal, Samuel. That's emotional. And emotion gets men killed in our business." Samuel leaned forward. "You think I acted emotionally? Didn't you?" "I acted strategically," Samuel corrected. "Thomas Wood was planning a murder. A sloppy, stupid murder that would have brought police attention to our entire district. He was involving friends, making noise, creating problems. I solved those problems before they became mine." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the dark street below. "And in the process, I reminded everyone in this city what happens when you prey on the defenseless. That sends a message, gentlemen. The kind of message that keeps order. Or the kind that makes you look like you're playing favorites," Constantine muttered. Samuel turned, his expression deadly. "Say that again." Constantine held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "Nothing. Forget it." "No," Samuel said, You have concerns. Voice them, all of you. Now, the silence was thick enough to cut. Finally, another man spoke, Victor, the oldest of the group, gray-haired and calculating. They think you're distracted, that you're spending time and resources on things that don't profit us. That's the concern. And do you share this concern, Victor? Victor considered carefully. I think you've always made unconventional choices, and those choices have kept us alive and prosperous. So no, I don't share the concern, but I understand where it comes from. Samuel nodded slowly. Anyone else? No one spoke. Good, Samuel said. Then let me address this once, and we won't discuss it again. What I do with my time is my business. What I choose to protect is my choice. You trust my judgment or you don't. Which is it? We trust you, Victor said immediately. The others echoed agreement, though some with more enthusiasm than others. Then trust that I know what I'm doing, Samuel said. And trust that anyone who thinks I've gone soft is welcome to test that theory personally. He let that hang in the air. Now, Samuel continued, returning to the table. We have actual business to discuss. The shipment from the harbor, the territory dispute on the south side. Things that actually matter. The meeting shifted to logistics and strategy, but Samuel noticed Constantine's lingering looks, James's tight jaw. There would be consequences to his choice. There always were. But Samuel had learned long ago that the men who questioned his decisions rarely lasted, and the ones who did learned to trust his instincts. Meanwhile, across the city, Cecilia was learning to live again. She'd spent the day cleaning, scrubbing floors, washing windows, making the house feel like home instead of a museum of grief. Nicole and Annie helped, their laughter filling rooms that had been silent too long. But as night fell and she tucked the girls into their beds, Cecilia felt the weight of everything settling on her shoulders. They were safe. They had a home. They had money enough to survive. But Thomas was still out there, broken, humiliated, but alive. And Cecilia knew enough about men like him to know that humiliation bred revenge. She sat in her living room, staring at the card Samuel had given her. The plain white card with a single phone number. Call that number. Leave a message. I'll find you. Should she call? Tell him her fears? Ask for more help? No. She'd already taken too much from him. But the fear remained, coiling in her stomach like a living thing. Thomas Wood sat in his darkened house, his right hand wrapped in a crude bandage, the two broken fingers throbbing with every heartbeat. He'd tried going to the hospital, but the questions had scared him off. How did this happen? Should we call the police? No police. Never police. Not after what Samuel had explained would happen if Thomas involved authorities. So he'd set the fingers himself badly, and now they bent at wrong angles, a permanent reminder of his mistake. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the rage. Everything was gone. The house, the accounts, the money he'd convinced himself he deserved. All taken by a woman who should have been grateful he'd let her live in his house. Taken because some Mafia thug decided to play hero. Thomas poured himself another drink, his left hand shaking. He should leave the city. Should disappear before Samuel decided broken fingers weren't enough. But leaving meant admitting defeat. Meant accepting that he'd been beaten by his dead brother's worthless widow and the criminal who protected her. Thomas drank, and the alcohol fed his anger instead of dulling it. Samuel Valentini thought he was untouchable, thought his reputation made him invincible. But everyone had weaknesses. Everyone made mistakes. And Thomas was patient enough to wait for Samuel to make his. Samuel drove through the city streets, his mind working through the evening's conversation. Constantine's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. In their world, perception mattered. Show weakness, and predators circled. Show too much humanity, and rivals saw opportunity. But Samuel had built his empire on being unpredictable, on making choices others wouldn't, on understanding that true power came not from being feared alone, but from being feared and respected. Helping Cecilia had been the right thing to do. Not because it benefited him strategically, though, that was a convenient side effect, but because it was simply right. And Samuel had learned long ago that men who abandoned their moral compass entirely became the very monsters they claimed to fight. He pulled up to a stoplight and glanced at the street corner. A homeless man huddled against a building, wrapped in newspapers. Once, Samuel would have driven past without a second thought, would have seen just another casualty of a brutal city. Now he saw Cecilia and her daughters on that bench, saw how close they'd come to being just another tragedy no one remembered. The light turned green. Samuel drove on, but something had shifted in him. Some calculation had been permanently altered. He didn't regret helping Cecilia, but he understood now that every choice came with a price. And he wondered, as snow began to fall again over the silent city, whether he'd be willing to pay it when the bill finally came due. Winter deepened its grip on the city, turning streets into rivers of slush and freezing wind into a constant companion. Cecilia settled into a routine that felt both familiar and strange. Wake up, make breakfast, walk Nicole to school, spend the day with Annie, teaching her letters and numbers, pick Nicole up, make dinner, read stories, sleep. Normal things. The kind of things she'd taken for granted before her husband died, but nothing felt truly normal anymore. Every unexpected sound made her jump. Every knock at the door sent her heart racing. Every dark car that passed too slowly made her wonder if Thomas had decided revenge was worth the risk. She hadn't heard from Samuel since the day he'd visited. 2 weeks had passed in silence, and Cecilia found herself looking for his car on her street more often than she wanted to admit. Not because she needed him, she told herself firmly, but because his presence had meant safety, certainty, the promise that someone would stand between her daughters and the darkness. Now she was alone again, and the isolation felt heavier than before. "Mama, you're doing it again," Nicole said one morning at breakfast. "Doing what, sweetheart?" "Looking at the window." "You always look at the window now." Cecilia forced a smile. "Just checking the weather." But Nicole was 6, not stupid. Her dark eyes, so much like her father's, studied Cecilia with uncomfortable perception. "Are you scared Uncle Thomas will come back?" Annie looked up from her cereal, suddenly alert. Cecilia chose her words carefully. "I'm being careful. That's different from being scared. Mr. Valentini said Uncle Thomas wouldn't come back," Annie stated with absolute certainty. "So he won't." The simple faith in her daughter's voice both warmed and terrified Cecilia. Annie believed Samuel's word was law, and maybe in this city, it was. But what happened if Samuel changed his mind? If he decided Cecilia and her daughters weren't worth protecting anymore? "Finish your breakfast," Cecilia said gently. "We need to get Nicole to school." Samuel stood in an abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of the city, watching 2 of his men deal with a problem. The problem was a dealer who'd been cutting product and pocketing the difference. Not a major crime in the grand scheme of things, but the kind that required visible consequences, or others would try the same. The dealer, a young man named Chris, who looked barely 20, knelt on the concrete floor, blood running from his nose, his hands zip-tied behind his back. "Please," Chris sobbed. "Please, I'll pay it back. Every cent, I swear." "You don't have every cent," Constantine said coldly, circling him. "You spent it. On what? Your girlfriend? Gambling? I had debts." "Everyone has debts," Constantine interrupted. "That doesn't give you permission to steal from us." Samuel watched in silence, his face expressionless. This was his world, the real one. Not helping widows and children, but maintaining order through fear and calculated violence. Chris looked up, saw Samuel, and his face went white. "Mr. Valentini, sir, please, I didn't mean any disrespect." Samuel approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He studied Chris the way a scientist might study an interesting specimen. Young, stupid, desperate. The kind of person who made bad choices and expected mercy. "How much did you steal?" Samuel asked quietly. 15,000. Over 3 months. "And you thought we wouldn't notice?" I don't know, I wasn't thinking." Samuel crouched down so they were eye level. "That's your problem, Chris. You didn't think, didn't consider consequences, didn't imagine what happens when you betray people who trust you. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't return the money. Sorry doesn't fix the disrespect." Samuel stood. "But sorry is a start," he nodded to Constantine. "Break his right hand. All the fingers. Make sure he understands this is the only warning he gets." Chris started screaming before Constantine even reached him. Samuel walked away, the sounds of breaking bones following him out of the warehouse. This was who he was. This was what he did. And yet, as he climbed into his car and pulled away from that place of punishment and pain, his mind drifted to a small blue house with a tilted mailbox, to 2 little girls who'd looked at him with trust instead of terror, to a woman who'd invited him into her home despite knowing exactly what he was capable of. Samuel drove through the city, past the district where Cecilia lived, slowing just slightly as he passed her street. He didn't turn down it, didn't stop, but he checked, made sure the lights were on, made sure everything looked peaceful. Then he drove on, back to his world of violence and shadow, carrying the memory of warmth he'd glimpsed in hers. That evening, Cecilia made dinner while Nicole did homework at the kitchen table, and Annie played with wooden blocks on the floor. A normal evening, a safe evening. But as she stirred pasta sauce, Cecilia's mind wandered to Samuel. She wondered what he was doing right now. Whether he thought about them at all, or if they'd been just another problem solved, another task completed in his efficient, emotionless way. She wondered if he was alone, like she was. If powerful, dangerous men got lonely in their big empty houses. She wondered. "Mama, someone's at the door," Nicole said. Cecilia's heart jumped. She set down the spoon and moved to the living room window, peering out carefully. A black car sat at the curb, Samuel's car, and Samuel himself stood on her porch, his hands in his coat pockets, waiting patiently. Cecilia's hands shook as she unlocked the door. "Samuel," she said, surprised how breathless she sounded. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he said simply. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on you." A lie. They both knew it. Samuel Valentini didn't just stop by. "We're fine," Cecilia said. "Everything's been quiet." "Good." They stood in awkward silence. Would you like to come in?" Cecilia asked. "I'm making dinner. It's nothing fancy, just pasta. But there's enough. I don't want to intrude." "You're not. The girls would love to see you." As if summoned, Annie appeared at Cecilia's side, her face lighting up. "Mr. Valentini, are you staying for dinner?" Samuel looked down at her, and something in his expression softened. "If your mother doesn't mind." "I don't mind," Cecilia said quickly. "Please, come in." Samuel stepped across the threshold, and somehow the house felt smaller and safer all at once. He was a dangerous man, a violent man, a man who broke fingers and ruled through fear. But when Annie took his hand and pulled him toward the kitchen, chattering about her blocks, he followed with surprising gentleness, and Cecilia realized that maybe, just maybe, he was as lonely as she was. Maybe they both needed this more than either would admit. Dinner was simple, but it felt like more. Samuel sat at Cecilia's small kitchen table, a table meant for a family of 4, now hosting 3, and a man who didn't belong but fit anyway, and listened to Annie explain the intricate rules of a game she'd invented with her blocks. "And this one is the castle," she said seriously, showing him a crooked tower. "And this one is the dragon. But the dragon is nice, so he protects the castle instead of burning it." "A dragon who protects instead of destroys," Samuel said thoughtfully. "That's unusual." "That's because dragons can choose," Annie explained with the certainty only children possess, just like people. Nicole ate quietly, watching Samuel with those knowing eyes. She was old enough to sense the undercurrents, to understand that this man was different from anyone else who'd ever sat at their table. Cecilia served pasta and salad, her hands steadier now than they'd been at the door. Having Samuel here felt right somehow, despite every logical reason it shouldn't. "This is good," Samuel said after his first bite. Simple words, but Cecilia heard the sincerity beneath them. "Thank you. It's nothing special." "Special is overrated," Samuel said. "Sometimes simple is better." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling with unnecessary words. "Mr. Valentini," Nicole said eventually, her voice careful. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you help us?" "Mama said you didn't have to, but you did anyway." Samuel set down his fork, considering the question with the same seriousness he'd given adult. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "But you're—" Nicole hesitated, choosing words carefully. "You're not like the helpers at school. The teachers and the counselors who say they help people. You're different." "How am I different?" "You're scary," Nicole said bluntly. "People are afraid of you, I can tell, but you helped us anyway, even though you're scary." Cecilia started to intervene, but Samuel held up a hand gently. "You're right," he told Nicole. "People are afraid of me, and sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes fear is what keeps order, what stops bad people from doing bad things. Like Uncle Thomas?" "Like him, yes." "Did you hurt him?" Nicole's eyes were steady, unflinching. Samuel didn't lie. "Yes." "Good," Nicole said fiercely. "He was going to hurt us. He deserved it." "Nicole," Cecilia started. "It's okay, Mama," Nicole interrupted. "I'm not stupid. I know what Uncle Thomas was planning. I heard him talking that night too. I was awake when you packed our things." Cecilia's breath caught. She hadn't known, hadn't realized Nicole had heard. "I was so scared," Nicole continued, her voice wavering now. "I thought we were going to die. I thought nobody would care enough to stop him." Tears spilled down her cheeks. But then Mr. Valentini found us. And he cared. Even though he didn't know us. Even though he's scary and powerful and doesn't have to care about anyone. Samuel's expression shifted something raw and unguarded, crossing his features before he controlled it. Everyone deserves someone to care, he said quietly. Especially children. Especially people who can't protect themselves. But who protects you? Annie asked innocently. The question hung in the air. Samuel looked at the little girl with her honest eyes and open heart, and for a moment, he had no answer. I protect myself, he said finally. That sounds lonely, Annie said matter-of-factly. Annie, Cecilia tried to redirect, but Samuel shook his head. It is lonely sometimes, he admitted. But that's the choice I made, the life I built. You could have dinner with us more, Annie suggested. Then you wouldn't be as lonely. Samuel's smile was small but genuine. I'd like that. They finished eating, and Cecilia cleared the plates while the girls showed Samuel their rooms, their toys, the small world they were rebuilding one day at a time. When they came back downstairs, Annie was yawning, and Nicole's eyes were heavy. Bedtime, Cecilia announced. But Mr. Valentini just got here, Annie protested. I'll be here another time, Samuel promised. If that's all right with your mother. 3 pairs of eyes turned to Cecilia. Yes, she said softly. You're always welcome here. The girls hugged Samuel goodnight, a gesture that seemed to surprise him more than any violence ever had, and trudged upstairs with their mother. When Cecilia came back down, Samuel was standing by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Thank you, Cecilia said, for coming, for staying, for everything. I should thank you, Samuel replied, for the dinner, for letting me be part of this. Part of what? Normal life, family, things I gave up a long time ago. Cecilia moved closer. It doesn't have to stay given up. You could. She stopped, unsure how to finish. I could what? Samuel turned to face her. Leave my life behind? Become something I'm not? I'm not asking you to change. I'm just saying, you don't have to be alone all the time. Samuel studied her face, seeing the sincerity there, the invitation to something he'd never allowed himself to want. The world I live in, he said carefully. It doesn't mix well with the world you're building for your daughters. Eventually those worlds collide, and when they do, people get hurt. I know what you are, Samuel, Cecilia said firmly. I've never had any illusions about that. But I also know what you did for us. What you continue to do just by existing as a reminder to people like Thomas that there are consequences for cruelty. She took a breath. My daughters need good men in their lives. Men who show them that strength can be used for protection instead of harm. You did that. You are that. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. I break people, Cecilia. I hurt them. I rule through fear. That's not... You chose mercy when you didn't have to? Cecilia interrupted. You saw 3 strangers who meant nothing to you, and you chose to help instead of walking away. That matters. That defines you more than anything else. Samuel looked toward the stairs where 2 little girls slept safely because of choices he'd made. I'll come back, he said finally. Not often. Not in ways that draw attention to you. But I'll come back. That's all I'm asking. Samuel moved toward the door, then paused. Cecilia? Yes, if anything happens. If anyone threatens you or the girls. Anyone at all. I'll call, she promised, touching the pocket where she kept his card. Samuel nodded. Then, surprising them both, he reached out and squeezed her hand gently. You're stronger than you know, he said. Don't forget that. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night like shadow returning to darkness. Cecilia locked the door and leaned against it, her hand still warm from his touch. Upstairs, her daughters slept peacefully. Outside, the city continued its endless cycle of violence and survival. But in this small blue house with the tilted mailbox, 3 lives had been pulled back from the edge and given a second chance. Not by law. Not by institutions. Not by systems designed to help, but too often failing. By a man who chose mercy when the world expected cruelty. By a man who proved that even in darkness, there could be light. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room was the one who chose to protect instead of destroy. Cecilia climbed the stairs to check on her daughters one last time before bed. Nicole slept with her yellow scarf draped over her pillow. Annie clutched a stuffed bear her father had given her years ago. They were safe. They were home. They were loved. And somewhere in the city, a dangerous man drove through empty streets, carrying the memory of warmth in a cold world, understanding for perhaps the first time that power meant nothing without purpose. Samuel Valentini had built an empire on fear, but tonight, he'd glimpsed something more valuable. Connection, belonging, the radical act of being seen not as a weapon, but as a person. He would return to his world of violence tomorrow, but tonight, he'd been part of something better, and that mattered more than he'd ever expected it could. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.